Hi everyone. In today's clip, I will talk a little bit about PEMF. Just a reminder that anything I post here is not meant to diagnose or cure anything and is for informational use only. For any health-related matters, please consult your healthcare provider. So you might be seeing a lot of posts and clips nowadays around the topic of PEMF, and I just wanted to explain this a bit further. PEMF stands for Pulsed Electromagnetic Field Therapy. Its history is quite old, stretching from early experiments with magnetism to modern medical devices, basically. Ancient Greek, Chinese, Egyptians, Persians, and other sort of traditions used naturally magnetic stones, particularly lodestone, which was a piece of mineral magnetite, in various healing practices. In 1800s, various electrical and magnetic devices were marketed for pain, paralysis, fatigue, and other ailments. One important development has been the realization that changing magnetic fields can induce electrical currents in the tissue of the body, and this eventually became fundamental to electromagnetic stimulation. Around 50s to 70s, bone healing became a major focus because we found out that the bone itself produces tiny electrical potentials when it is mechanically stressed. This led to the idea that externally generated electrical or electromagnetic signals might encourage bone repair. By 1979, in US, the FDA allowed the first commercial non-invasive electrical bone growth stimulator for treating certain non-union fractures. The non-union fractures are the type of broken bones that have failed to sort of heal properly over an expected period of time. So the two ends are sort of still not connecting. During 1980s to 1990s, we started investigating different frequencies, intensities, pulse patterns, and treatment durations, and PEMF was explored for things like bone healing, osteoarthritis, pain, soft tissue healing, circulation, inflammation, and more. You need to remember, though, that PEMF isn't just one single treatment. A 5 Hz field, for example, at one intensity and waveform is quite different from 50 Hz or 100 Hz field at another intensity and waveform. This recipe sort of matters enormously. So today, PEMF devices have become increasingly available outside hospitals and orthopedic clinics. There are now systems ranging from relatively simple consumer sort of mats and localized applicators to sophisticated clinical devices. Now, what I want to relay to you is that PEMF isn't really about putting a static magnet on the body. A static magnet produces a relatively constant magnetic field. PEMF deliberately changes the magnetic field over time. That changing field can interact with electrically conductive sort of tissue and produce extremely small electrical effects. PEMF has evolved through 4 phases, basically. It has gone from magnetism to electricity to biological or cellular signaling to modern frequency devices. PEMF itself is a modern technology. Ancient physicians did not have PEMF machines. What they had was an understanding of magnets and their perceived effects, which later became electromagnetic therapy. During the 18th and 19th centuries, they began to understand that electricity and magnetism were intimately connected, and a changing magnetic field can generate an electrical current. Then came the idea of frequency. So PEMF device doesn't simply produce a magnetic field, it produces a field that pulses. For example, on, off, on, off, on, off. The number of pulses happening in each second is considered the frequency. So 1 hertz is 1 pulse a second, 10 hertz is 10 pulse a second, 50 is 50 a second, 100 is 100 a second. So, and the waveform intensity, pulse duration, rise and fall, and the duty cycle can all change the biological stimulus. The duty cycle, by the way, is how much of time something is on compared to with what time, how much of time it is off. So saying I use PEMF is like saying I use music. It doesn't tell you whether you're listening to a lullaby or a marching band. Our body cells maintain electrical differences across their membranes. They also contain electrically charged ions like calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and so on. So appropriately designed electromagnetic signals can influence some of these cellular processes. Calcium signaling became particularly important in PEMF research. This is the way that cells use calcium ions as a kind of internal messenger. So there isn't one universal healing frequency. So for example, very low frequencies, roughly 1 to 10 hertz, are common in PEMF systems and overlap with frequencies sometimes discussed in relation to neural and biological rhythms. And then we have 10 to 50 hertz in various electromagnetic stimulation research and sort of commercial systems. Then we have 50 to 100 hertz and higher, and so on. So also these are used in some clinical and research applications, particularly depending on the tissue and desired effects. But frequency is only one piece of the puzzle. And then there is 528 hertz. 528 hertz is not a standard medically established PEMF healing frequency. It became popular primarily through solfeggio frequency and sound healing traditions, where 528 hertz has been associated with concepts such as transformation, love, and DNA repair. That's a different tradition from the historical development of clinical PEMF. I'm a fan of using various tuning forks and frequencies in healing, but it's not exactly the same field. Our bodies are extremely fascinating things, machines, I should say, in the fact that it isn't simply a chemical machine, it's also an electrical system. Our nervous system communicates electrically, our heart generates electrical activity, cell membranes maintain electrical potentials, muscles respond to electrical signals, bones exhibit electrical phenomena when mechanically sort of stressed. In today's medicine, PEMF is being used when fractures aren't healing properly, as I mentioned, where prescription PEMF bone growth stimulator is basically placed around the fracture that has developed a non-union, and the device is sort of worn externally, which delivers electromagnetic pulses to the fractured site. It's also used after certain spinal fusion operations. The purpose has not been sort of to replace surgery, rather the electromagnetic stimulation is used as an addition, essentially giving the fusion site an additional physical stimulus while the vertebrae are trying to form a solid bone. Another area this is being used is musculoskeletal pain, osteoarthritis, stiffness, and soft tissue problems. Also, I need to say that PEMF is not the same as TMS. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, also uses rapidly changing magnetic fields, but it is a different technology and is designed specifically to influence brain activity. This is used medically for conditions including major depression, and certain forms are also approved for migraine and or OCD. TMS users substantially, TMS uses substantially different field sort of characteristics and aims to induce electrical activity in specific areas of the brain. So PMF and TMS are cousins, but they're not twins. Okay, so there's also distinction between PMF and 5G signals. They're both electromagnetic fields, but they're not remotely the same kind of exposure. The simplest way to see this is think of the electromagnetic spectrum as a gigantic piano. PEMF deliberately selects particular notes and pulses them sort of in a carefully controlled pattern. 5G uses radio frequency electromagnetic waves primarily to carry information between antennas and devices. So PEMF, the purpose is therapeutic stimulation, is pulsed, deliberately patterned, is designed for a particular biological application, usually localized and controlled, and often low frequency based on the device. 5G, the purpose is wireless communication, modulated radio frequency signal, is designed for communication and coverage, typically is hundreds of megahertz or several gigahertz, with some systems using higher bands and variable with distance and network activity, of course. But both can interact with living tissue. That's the part that often gets lost in the EMF is good versus EMF is bad argument. So the body isn't completely electrically passive. As I mentioned, nerves, muscles, membranes, and many cellular processes involve electrical charges and ion movements. Electromagnetic fields can therefore interact with biological systems for sure, right? So the frequency, waveform, intensity, exposure pattern, distance, and tissue absorption are all different between 5G signaling and PEMF. Hope this has been helpful. My clips are available on TikTok, Telegram, and YouTube. Like, share, and follow for more. Be the light.